The hidden valley of the last unicorns. In the forgotten folds of the world, beyond where roads end and maps grow blank, there lies a secret valley. It is surrounded by mist-covered mountains and protected by ancient trees whose roots twist like sleeping dragons. No human has ever set foot there, at least, not in 1,000 years. This is the hidden valley of the last unicorns. By day, the valley hums in silence. Sunbeams shimmer on the tops of soft hills, and butterflies the size of your hand drift lazily between crystal blue flowers. The grass glows faintly, touched by old magic. But the true wonder only begins when the sky turns indigo and the first stars awaken. That's when the unicorns emerge. They are not like the unicorns in storybooks. Their horns are not simple spirals but flowing rivers of light. Their eyes do not gleam, they glow like embers from a sacred fire. Their manes float gently in the air, as if they remember what it felt like to swim through clouds. They are ancient. They remember a time before humans built cities. Before metal split the earth. Before the sky grew tired of smoke. Back then, unicorns roamed freely through every forest and meadow. They were friends to foxes and guides to lost travelers. Children could sometimes see them if their hearts were quiet enough. But humans changed. Curiosity turned to greed. Wonder turned to possession. Unicorns began to vanish, not because they stopped existing, but because they chose to hide. They created the hidden valley, unreachable by force, invisible to those who would capture or harm. And so, the unicorns lived in peace, until whispers began to spread once more. Stories told by hikers of strange lights at dusk. Of hoof prints appearing in the snow where no creature had passed. Of soft, melodic sounds echoing between trees on windless nights. Some humans came to hunt. Others to take. And a few, only a very few, came to listen. One of them was a little girl named Luma. Luma had never been like the others in her village. While others ran, shouted, and chased, she watched. She listened. She had no need for loud games. Her joy came from the rustle of leaves, the sparkle of dew, and the way the moon lit the tops of the trees. Her grandmother once told her, the unicorns are still out there. But they only show themselves to those who carry no cages in their hearts. So Luma waited. On a still autumn night, when the air smelled like fallen leaves and distant rain, she slipped out of her home and into the forest. She brought no flashlight. Only a blanket, a loaf of bread, and the memory of her grandmother's lullaby. She walked until the sky was soaked in stars. Then she stopped by a quiet stream, nestled between two mossy stones, and began to sing. Her voice was soft, uncertain at first. But the song was older than fear. It rose gently into the air like a lantern floating on still water. The unicorns heard it. From the edge of the valley, hidden behind veils of moonlight and fern, they listened. A young one, barely more than a foal, stepped forward, her silver hooves barely touching the ground. But the elder unicorn, Thalorian, held her back. Thalorian was the oldest among them. His mane had streaks of stardust. His horn glowed like a lighthouse in the dark. He had seen what people could do, and he remembered. But even he paused at Luma's voice. For the first time in centuries, a human had not come to take. She had come to be near. Yet further away, deep in the forest, something stirred, something harsher. A group of men in dark coats, holding nets, tranquilizer darts, and cameras. They had heard the same stories. But they were not like Luma. They did not come to listen. They came to find, to name, to own. The unicorns felt the tremor in the earth. They knew what it meant. It was time to escape again. Not just from this forest, but from this world. So, as Luma slept peacefully under the stars, curled like a kitten beneath a tree, the unicorns began their departure. They moved silently, like moonlight gliding over water. Thalorian led the way, his horn casting a silver path ahead. The youngest followed last, looking back once toward the sleeping girl, leaving behind only a single glowing hair from her tail, a gift of trust. The escape was not through tunnels or roads, but through magic. They passed under an ancient arch of stone that only opened at midnight. They crossed a meadow where gravity did not hold, and each step lifted them slightly higher until their hooves kissed the air. They whispered to the river, and it parted for them. Behind them, the humans found nothing. No tracks. No trail. Only silence. And Luma, waking with a yawn, found only the soft curl of silver thread near her hand. She picked it up gently. It hummed with warmth and glowed faintly, like a memory that hadn't happened yet. She smiled. She never told anyone. Not even her grandmother. But every night, she returned to the same place. She sang the same song. And in her dreams, she sometimes heard a soft galloping, as if the unicorns were running through the skies above her bed, safe and free. And maybe, just maybe, they were. Chapter 1: The Silence Beyond the Pines. In a part of the world where no roads reach, where clouds hang low like soft curtains and birds sing songs no one has recorded, there lies a forest untouched by time. Not even the oldest trees in the known world compare to the ancient pines here, their roots winding so deep into the earth that they seem to drink from memory itself. Beyond those pines, beneath the hush of leaves that never fall, waits a valley. Not marked on any map. Not spoken of in the cities. This place belongs to stillness. It belongs to night. It belongs to magic. It is called, by those few who know of it, the hidden valley of the last unicorns. No humans live there. Not anymore. But long ago, before the world became too loud and the sky too crowded, unicorns walked freely among people. They weren't beasts of legend then, they were companions of the dusk, quiet guardians of wonder. A child might find one while picking berries in the morning mist. A wandering healer might glimpse one while crossing a foggy bridge at dawn. There were no cages then. No chasing. Just respect. Just magic. But that time passed. People forgot how to look slowly. They forgot how to sit in silence and let arise on its own. And so, the unicorns gathered, one by one, and left the world behind. They retreated into a place that could not be found by force or by fame. A place only the gentle-hearted could even begin to approach. They built a home of moonlight and moss, of waterfalls that whispered and stones that remembered. They made the valley. It was vast, cradled by sleeping mountains and lined with silver blue grass that glowed faintly in the dark. The trees bent inward protectively, their branches curved like lullabies. In the center of it all was a quiet pool so still it looked like a mirror for the stars. This was where they lived. The unicorns. Each one different. Thalorian, the elder, bore a horn like frozen lightning and eyes full of starlight. His breath smelled of snow and sage. He remembered the first fire made by human hands. He remembered the first broken promise, too. Then there was Lyra, whose hooves never left a mark. She moved like memory, soft and silent. Birds sometimes rode on her back as she glided over the tall grass. Her mane was long and dark, woven with stardust and falling leaves. And little Sorrel, still young, still trembling with newness. Her horn was barely a bud, her legs too long for her body. She had questions in her eyes. She often chased fireflies and tried to talk to stones. Each night, they emerged slowly from the shelter of a hidden glade where they slept in tangled nests of wildflowers. They stepped gently into the open air, under skies awash with stars, and drank from the moon pool together. The surface of the water shimmered in their reflection, catching the shape of their grace, but never their full essence. No mirror could hold what they were. They did not speak with mouths, their voices were feelings, sense, waves of understanding. A look from Thalorian could soothe a frightened creature. A nudge from Lyra could spark laughter even in a weeping fawn. But they were cautious. For though they had been safe for centuries, they felt the tremor of change. The winds began to bring news from far away. Stray bits of metal, strange scents, and once, a drone that had wandered too far and crashed at the edge of their world. The unicorns buried it under vines before it could blink again. They watched the stars more carefully after that. They did not hate humans. But they feared what humans had become. And then, one quiet night, the wind shifted again. This time, it was not a machine. Not a scent of metal. Not the stomp of heavy boots. It was a song. Soft. Human. Young. It drifted in gently, as if unsure it belonged. Thalorian raised his head. Lyra paused mid-step. Sorrel froze, ears twitching. The song was not loud, barely a breath above the wind, but it held something that hadn't touched the valley in centuries. Not threat. Not hunger. Hope. The unicorns turned as one, looking past the trees, past the veil of vines, toward the edges of the forest. They couldn't yet see the source. But the melody reached them. Somewhere out there, beyond their safety, a girl sat alone beneath the branches. Her name was Luma, and she didn't come with traps or tools or shouts. She came with a blanket, a soft heart, and her grandmother's lullaby. And in that moment, the unicorns, for the first time in generations, listened not just to the wind, but to a human. And the forest, ancient and vast, held its breath. Chapter 2: The Girl Who Sang to Stars. Luma had never quite belonged in the world as it was. Even as a small child, she could feel when someone was pretending. She could hear when someone said, "I'm fine," but meant, "I'm breaking." The world was full of noises, lights, expectations, but Luma's heart beat to something slower. Something softer. While the other children in her village learned to run fast, shout louder, and chase things they didn't really want, Luma walked barefoot on stone paths just to feel the earth's breath beneath her soles. She'd stop mid-sentence to watch a beetle struggle over a twig. She'd sing to plants, not because anyone told her to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. She didn't know why the forest near her home felt different from other places. Only that it did. Every time she stepped beneath its canopy, she could sense something watching, not with eyes, but with curiosity. Not in fear, but with old, silent recognition. It was like the trees knew her. Like the wind leaned closer to listen. And so, on the night of the harvest moon, when the sky turned a pale gold and the fields shimmered with dew, Luma left her house without saying a word. She wore a simple linen dress and carried a satchel of bread, dried fruit, and a worn notebook. Her grandmother had given her that notebook, and inside were little drawings, animals, strange symbols, and lullabies written in delicate, slanted handwriting. One song was called Starhoof and Hollow Horn. It was a lullaby her grandmother used to sing when Luma had bad dreams. And tonight, without knowing why, it was the only song Luma wanted to hum. The forest was dark, but not in a frightening way. The moon spilled between the leaves like honey, forming pools of light where fireflies danced in slow spirals. Owls blinked from high branches but did not hoot. They seemed to know she wasn't there to disturb the balance. She walked for what felt like hours, guided not by a trail but by instinct and something else. Something pulling gently at her chest, like a thread woven from memory and stardust. Eventually, she came to a stream she had never seen before. The water was glassy and perfectly still, as though it had never known a ripple. Smooth stone sat at its edge, half covered in moss so thick it looked like fur. Without thinking, Luma sat, drew her knees to her chest, and began to hum. At first, the tune came quietly. A whisper. Just her and the water and the moon. But as she sang, something shifted. The air grew warmer, but not heavy. A breeze passed through the trees, circling her like a protective shawl. And far away, deep within the valley she couldn't see, the unicorns heard her. Thalorian froze mid-step. He had just led the herd through a ring of moonstone mushrooms, a ritual they performed each night to mark the passing of days. His hooves stirred no soil. His breath fogged in the cool air, though no one else's did. He was old, older than any living creature in the forest, and in that moment, he felt something stir inside him that he had locked away long ago. It was not fear. It was recognition. He turned, lifting his head high, ears flicking toward the northeast, toward the sound. Lyra stopped next, a few paces behind him. She looked up as well. Her mane shimmered under the stars, and in her eyes, a deep, slow sadness began to shift, like an ice shelf cracking under spring thaw. And then Sorrel, young, trembling, endlessly curious Sorrel, bolted forward toward the edge of the trees. The others gasped in unison, not with sound, but through shared presence. For Sorrel was too young to know what danger truly was. Too innocent to understand why they had hidden so long. She darted through low ferns, her small silver hoofs thudding softly, her breath catching with excitement. A human, she thought. Here. But not just any human. A girl. A child. One whose voice didn't demand, didn't push, it offered. Offered wonder. Offered warmth. Offered peace. The Lorian chased her, not in anger, but in worry. His long legs moved silently, but quickly. The elder unicorn knew how fragile peace was. How even a pure voice could call shadows if the wrong ears listened. Because tonight, something else stirred. Not far from where Luma sat, deep in the southern woods, a group of people trudged forward through darkness. They wore black boots and carried long cases that clicked with metal. Their faces were lit by the glow of blue screens. They had no song in their hearts, only strategy. They had come for proof. For capture. For profit. Some had heard of the unicorn legends and scoffed. Others had believed just enough to try. They followed whispers, drone footage, thermal scans, all leading to this forest. All hoping that what had been hidden for so long could now be turned into news, into trophies, into money. They didn't yet know about Luma. They didn't know that a child's lullaby had already done what their technology never could, pierced the veil. Sorrel came to the stream's edge first. She stayed hidden in the brush, peering through leaves, eyes wide and unblinking. Luma sat barely 10 paces away, her voice now fading into soft hums, her breath slow with tiredness. She looked smaller up close. Not threatening. Not greedy. Just alone. Sorrel didn't understand humans, but she understood loneliness. She stepped forward, just a little. A twig snapped. Luma's eyes opened. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she blinked, tilted her head, and softly whispered. Hello? Chapter 3, The Moment Between Breaths. The air stood still. Even the leaves seemed to pause mid-rustle, as if the entire forest was waiting to see what would happen next. One girl. One unicorn. Two beings staring at each other across a stream no wider than a leap. Luma's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming. Her mind tried to make sense of the creature before her, a being from stories and paintings and myths. But no picture had ever captured the glow that shimmered around its body. No fairy tale had prepared her for the depth of its eyes, ancient, gentle, curious. Sorrel, barely more than a foal, stared back with equal wonder. She had never been this close to a human before. Her legs trembled with fear and excitement, her silver-white fur catching the moonlight like fresh snow. Her small, spiraling horn flickered softly, pulsing with the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat. The two locked eyes, not as predator and prey, not as girl and legend, but simply as two young beings, meeting for the very first time. Then, very slowly, Luma did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a wide grin or a triumphant expression, just a small, soft smile, as if she were welcoming an old friend. And just like that, the forest sighed. The tension in the air loosened. A nearby owl blinked and resumed its slow blinking. A pair of glow beetles floated past, spinning lazy circles over the stream. The moment, once so fragile, now felt sacred. Luma whispered, barely loud enough for the leaves to hear. You're real. Sorrel didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling. She took a step forward. And another. Until she was standing at the edge of the water, only a few hoof lengths away. Her reflection shimmered beside Luma's in the stream, two glowing shapes from different worlds. One born from starlight, one born from song. Luma slowly reached into her satchel. Not for a camera. Not for a net. But for bread. She broke a small piece in half and placed it gently on a flat stone between them. Sorrel tilted her head, curious. She had never eaten human food. But the gesture, the offering, was clear. Still, before she could move closer, a soft rumble echoed through the ground. Distant. Low. But enough to make the water in the stream ripple and the birds in the trees stop their singing once more. Thalorian emerged from the shadows like a wave of dusk. Tall. Regal. Calm. His horn glowed with pale blue light, casting long streaks through the trees. He stood beside Sorrel without a sound, placing his body gently between her and the girl. Luma didn't flinch. She simply lowered her gaze and bowed her head, not out of fear, but with reverence. And Thalorian watched. His mind, deep and wide as the night sky, sifted through ancient instincts. 1,000 years of hiding. Of running. Of protecting his herd. But there was something in this child's presence, not just innocence, but alignment. Her soul didn't press against the world, it leaned into it. He stepped forward. Sorrel stepped back, but Thalorian paused beside the stream. He lowered his head and touched the stone where the bread had been placed. Then he lifted his horn and, with a faint shimmer, let the bread dissolve into a burst of white particles that danced into the air like fireflies. It was not a rejection. It was transformation. A thank you. Luma looked up and whispered, "You're safe with me." Thalorian, who had not trusted humans for centuries, almost believed her. And in the deepest roots of the forest, where no light ever reached, something else stirred. The people with the black boots had split into 3 teams. Their devices buzzed with weak signals. The man in charge, tall, gaunt, eyes like frozen iron, tapped at his tablet. "We're close," he muttered. Too close to lose the trail now. They hadn't seen the girl. But they had picked up the same pulse Thalorian had sent into the air, the ripple of wild, ancient magic. Not understanding what it meant, they thought it was proof. That something valuable was near. That this place, so still, so quiet, might finally give them what they wanted. They walked faster. Unicorns don't leave footprints, but people do. And in the moss beneath their feet, the earth began to frown. Back by the stream, Thalorian turned his head slowly, toward the west. His glowing horn flickered once, then brightened. Lyra appeared moments later, silent as smoke, followed by 2 more unicorns, both grown, both alert. Luma looked at them all, awe softening her face into something like wonder. "I won't tell anyone," she promised. And she meant it. But even the purest truth can't stop what's already begun. Chapter 4, The Path of Moon and Root. The forest was no longer still. It was holding its breath, stretched like a string too close to breaking. The wind had changed again. Not harsh, not loud, but strange. It carried with it the smell of oil and batteries, sweat and cold steel. A smell that did not belong to trees or moss or wild streams. Thalorian raised his head. He had known this would happen, had felt it in the way the stars trembled a little more last night, in the way the birds had flown lower, the insects quieter. Magic, like all things, can only go unnoticed for so long. Now the forest's oldest secret had been found. Not by the girl, she was a song the world had nearly forgotten. But by others. By those who came not to listen or offer, but to dissect. To possess. And even now, they were drawing near. He turned toward Lyra, who had just arrived beside the glade. Her eyes glinted in the moonlight, and in them he saw it, the silent question. Do we flee again? But the question had no easy answer. This valley was not only their home, it was their last sanctuary. The last patch of land where their hoofprints still meant something. The last breath of magic not yet claimed by concrete or currency. How many times could they leave behind everything they loved? How many times could they run from those who refused to understand? Behind Thalorian, young Sorrel stood beside Luma. Her head was tilted, one ear pointed toward the trees, her body torn between curiosity and caution. She could feel the shift, the way the trees had grown tense, the way the stream now hummed with warning. And yet, she didn't want to leave the girl. Luma sat cross-legged again, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes closed as if listening to something no one else could hear. And maybe she was. Because deep inside her, beyond skin and bone, beyond language, something had awakened. A warmth. A sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her grandmother had last held her hand. She opened her eyes and looked at Sorrel. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Sorrel said nothing. But her breath slowed. And Luma understood. The girl stood up. She brushed off her dress and stepped back slowly, giving the unicorn space. She could feel the shift too, a ripple in the undercurrent of the forest, like a drumbeat rising beneath the soil. She didn't want to cause harm. Didn't want to be the reason they vanished again. "I won't stop you," she said. "If you need to go." But then she paused. Looked up at Thalorian. "But maybe I can help." He tilted his head, his horn glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. The forest had seen many humans, but not one like this in centuries. Farther away, in the part of the woods where the trees thinned and the ground grew dry, the intruders marched forward. 12 in total. 3 teams. 1 goal. Their names were not important. What they believed they were doing was discovery, they said. Scientific breakthrough. Proof of magic, they whispered behind closed doors and blinking screens. But what they truly wanted, what most of them couldn't admit even to themselves, was to own what should never be owned. They moved quickly, quietly, scanning everything, tree trunks for scorch marks, the air for heat traces, the ground for magic residue. And now, one of their devices was beeping. A slow, persistent pulse. The signal was close. "We're picking up a source," said the man in front, tall, gaunt, with a gray scarf wrapped tightly around his neck like a leash. "The readings are spiking. Prepare containment." Behind him, others readied nets laced with golden wire. They didn't know where it came from, only that it was said to bind things not meant to be bound. They had tranquilizer darts dipped in a thick, silvery solution. Designed for creatures they did not yet understand. And worst of all, they believed they were doing something noble. They believed the unicorns would be better off studied, recorded, protected in cold buildings under artificial light. They couldn't see that the creatures they chased were older than the oldest city. That they carried in their breath the stories of stars and soil and sky. Back in the valley, the herd had gathered. 9 unicorns stood now among the tall ferns and glowing wildflowers. Each one shimmering softly, each one breathing in time with the other. Their minds linked in a web of wordless connection. Lyra stepped forward. She touched her horn to Thalorian's shoulder. Not a gesture of fear, but of readiness. They would not run again. If they left this place, there would be no more valleys. No more streams untouched by maps. No more fields where hooves could dance without fear. They would make a stand, not with violence, but with presence. They would become magic, so undeniable, so vast and ancient and real, that no machine could capture them. But they needed time. And time might come from the girl. Luma stepped forward, very slowly, until she stood in the center of the glade. She closed her eyes. And she sang. Not a melody she knew. Not a lullaby from books. A song older than language. It rose from her chest, soft and pure, spiraling up like smoke from a sacred fire. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was true. The unicorns lowered their heads and began to hum in harmony. Their horns glowed brighter. The plants around them leaned in. The stones beneath their hooves shimmered. Even the sky seemed to pause. And then, the hunters arrived. They stepped into the clearing, nets raised, darts ready, sensors blinking, and froze. Because what they saw didn't fit into any of their plans. A girl standing in the center of a glowing circle of unicorns, singing. The herd surrounding her like guardians of a temple. The air thick with light and warmth and something their machines couldn't measure. One man dropped his equipment. Another gasped. The leader barked orders, "Move in." But his voice wavered. The air pushed back. Every step they took felt heavier. Slower. Like the forest itself did not want them here. And still Luma sang. The song built, layer by layer, growing not louder but deeper. It rang in the hearts of every listener, not as sound, but as memory. A memory of what the world had been. What it could be again. Tears rolled down one hunter's face. Another dropped to his knees. The unicorns began to step in slow circles around Luma, horns glowing in waves. The Lorian's horn pulsed like a lighthouse, his hoofs tracing glowing paths on the earth. And then, the light surged. Not blinding. Not burning. Just true. And when it faded, the hunters were gone. Not hurt. Not cursed. Simply, placed somewhere else. At the edge of the forest. As if the forest had gently plucked them from the glade and set them down far away. Confused. Dazed. Empty-handed. The clearing was quiet again. The unicorns slowed their circle. Luma, breathless, sat down on the moss and smiled. Sorrel trotted up and nuzzled her hand. "You stayed," whispered the girl. And the unicorns, in their own quiet way, said, "So did you." Chapter 5: The Breath of the Forest. The glade was quiet now. No wind stirred the leaves. No owl hooted. Even the crickets, who always hummed beneath the stars, seemed to pause, as if the forest itself had placed a hand over its heart and whispered, "Wait." In the center of the circle, the moss still glowed faintly from the magic. Luma sat cross-legged, her palms resting gently on her thighs, her eyes half closed, as if caught between waking and dream. Around her, the unicorns stood like silent guardians, each of them facing outward, not in fear, but in stillness. Not to protect themselves, but her. For the first time in centuries, something had changed. Not just the disappearance of the intruders. Not just the song. But something deeper. The boundary between the unicorn's hidden realm and the human world had thinned, not by force, not by technology, but by trust. By presence. By a single girl's quiet willingness to see and not possess. The ancient trees felt it. Their roots, woven deep beneath the valley, carried the message through miles of soil and memory. From one tree to the next, the signal passed, the bond has returned. The door has opened. Sorrel stood beside Luma, watching her breathe. The young unicorn had never imagined this. She had spent her whole life being told to hide, to stay silent, to run if she ever saw the glint of human eyes. But Luma was nothing like the warnings. She had offered food without asking for anything. She had sung, not to call them, but to comfort herself. And now she simply sat, not in awe or demand, but in calm, patient presence. Sorrel lowered her head and gently touched her horn to the back of Luma's hand. It was not a grand gesture. But it was everything. Luma gasped softly at the warmth. A feeling like soft rain in spring, like morning light through a window, bloomed inside her chest. She turned and met Sorrel's gaze, eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. "For staying." Sorrel blinked slowly. Behind them, Valorian stepped forward. The herd parted for him like mist before the moon. His mane glowed more brightly now, not just with magic, but with something older. A decision. He approached Luma and Sorrel in silence, then bowed his head. And with that bow, everything shifted. The wind returned. Soft, like a breath released. The stream behind them began to murmur again. The flowers glowed a little brighter. Somewhere above, a night bird let out a long, low call, not in alarm, but in reverence. Valorian raised his head and looked at the herd. Then, for the first time in centuries, he spoke, not with words, but with thought. A ripple of warm understanding spread from him to them, from them to the trees, and from the trees to the girl. "We do not hide from her." The others nodded. Even the more cautious ones, even Lyra, whose heart was wrapped in layers of old wounds, stepped forward, eyes soft. Something had changed. Not just in the valley, but in them. The night passed slowly, but gently. Luma remained with them until the stars began to fade and the sky turned the faintest shade of blue. Not once did she ask to touch their horns or take a picture. Not once did she plead to stay. She simply sat, breathed, listened. And when the morning light kissed the treetops, she stood, gave a small bow, copying what she had seen the Lorian do, and whispered, "I'll come again. But only when I'm needed." Sorrel followed her to the edge of the glade. The Lorian did too. The old unicorn's horn shimmered once more, this time casting a thin, silvery line on the moss, stretching behind Luma as she walked. A path. One only she could follow. One that would always lead her back. And then, she was gone. The forest swallowed her steps. But it remembered her. Far away, the intruders awoke one by one, lying in soft fields miles from where they had last stood. None were harmed. Their equipment, strangely, was gone. The sensors, the nets, the darts, vanished like mist in sunlight. One of them, the younger man who had wept during the song, sat up slowly. He remembered everything. Not in words. Not in images. But in feeling. A kind of quiet awe had settled over him, like dust from a forgotten book opened after centuries. He looked around at the others, but no one spoke. Not yet. They had been given something, though they could not name it. And they had lost something, though they could not remember what. It would take time to understand. It always does, when magic returns. Back in the valley, the unicorns gathered one last time before dawn. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The night had shown them something that no prophecy, no warning, no elder tale had prepared them for. Hope, not as legend, not as dream, but as choice. The forest had not failed them. And perhaps, just perhaps, the world beyond had not either. The Lorian lifted his head and sent one final pulse of light into the sky, not bright, not loud, but steady. It shimmered like a northern star, unseen by most, except by those with hearts quiet enough to notice. And in a village not far away, in a bed of tangled blankets and half-open windows, Luma dreamed of unicorns running freely across the clouds. She did not smile in her sleep. She wept. Not from sadness. But from a fullness that words could never carry. The valley was safe. The unicorns were free. And somewhere, out in the world of iron and noise, the story was already beginning to bloom again. One child. One song. One promise kept. Chapter 6, When the World Forgets and the Heart Remembers. The days that followed were quieter than they had ever been. Not because nothing happened. But because everything had changed. The forest was still the same in all the ways that mattered. The moss remained soft and cool. The stream flowed its endless story through stone and root. The trees whispered to one another like old friends sharing secrets, just loud enough for the wind to overhear. The stars, above it all, blinked as they always had. And yet, something new lived between the leaves now. A remembering. The kind of remembering that hums in the earth after a great storm has passed, not because it left destruction behind, but because it stirred something too deep to name. The kind of memory that lives in your chest, even when your mind forgets the details. The kind that roots itself and quietly grows. Luma had not returned. Not yet. But the unicorns could feel her presence still, not in her footsteps or her voice, but in the shape of the wind, the patience of the stream, the way the glade seemed to hold its breath each night, just in case she came again. Sorrel missed her. She did not understand the ache at first. She had never known what it meant to miss something. Unicorns were creatures of presence, of now. They did not hold on to the past the way humans did. They lived within the rhythm of the moon and the soil. But now she understood longing. Some nights she wandered close to the edge of the glade, peering between trees, wondering if she'd see Luma's silhouette walking through the dark with her gentle eyes and quiet hands. The Lorian watched her kindly but said nothing. He, too, had known that feeling once. Long ago, before the valley was hidden, before the world had grown so sharp. He remembered a time when the boundary between humans and wild things was thin, when shepherds would bow to unicorns in the mist, and mothers would leave bowls of sweet water at the edge of the woods, just in case a horned traveler passed by. It had taken centuries, but the first thread had been woven again. Not with fire. Not with technology. But with trust. In a quiet meadow not far from the valley, the men who had once come with nets and wires returned to their cities. They told no one what they had seen. Not because they were sworn to secrecy, but because the words felt empty in their mouths. How could you explain a moment that didn't belong to language? How could you describe a song that lived in your ribs and refused to fade? One by one, they left the teams, changed careers, disappeared from the spotlight. Some became gardeners. Some took long walks in nature without knowing why. Some began to hum lullabies they'd never heard before. A few even dreamed of hooves on clouds and soft eyes glowing like lanterns in the night. They never found the forest again. And the forest, wisely, never invited them. But the unicorns knew, not all who leave are lost. Some are simply changed. Seasons passed. The glade bloomed in spring with petals the color of sunrise. In summer, the stream swelled with sweet water, and the moss grew thick and spongy underhoof. Autumn painted the treetops in gold and violet, while Lyra traced swirling paths through fallen leaves with her horn. And in winter. In winter, the valley became a place of stillness so deep, even the stars seemed to lean closer. Sorrel grew stronger. Her horn lengthened, her coat thickened with shimmering strands of silver. She still wandered to the stream at dusk, hoping. But slowly, she began to hum her own songs. Not quite like Luma's, different, softer, wilder. Yet they carried the same note of hope. One morning, after the last frost had melted, she found something unusual by the stream. A circle of stones, carefully placed. Within it, a woven bracelet made of dried grass, tiny flowers, and a single white feather knotted into the middle. It hadn't been there the night before. She lowered her head, breathed in the scent, and smiled. Luma had come and gone in the night. She hadn't wanted to disturb them. She had simply left a sign. A reminder, I still remember. I still believe. I still care. Sorrel touched her horn gently to the feather and felt a pulse of warmth ripple through the air. A quiet joy. They were still connected. They always would be. Deep beneath the glade, where roots tangled like sleeping dragons and soil held the memories of every step, the forest made a promise. It was not a spoken vow. It was older than language. The forest promised to remember. To protect. To wait, not just for Luma, but for any soul quiet enough, kind enough, still enough to hear the song again. Because the hidden valley was not just a place. It was a threshold. A bridge between what the world had become and what it still could be. A place where the wild and the wise could meet. Where breath and hoof step shared the same rhythm. Where magic lived not in spectacle, but in stillness. And now, because of one girl, one song, one night, the valley was no longer hiding in fear. It was waiting in hope. And Luma. She grew, as all children do. But not in the usual ways. She grew in patience. In wonder. In silence. She kept her story to herself, not because she was afraid, but because she knew some things lose their shape when spoken too soon. Instead, she wrote songs. Drew pictures. Planted trees. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the night was warm, she would walk quietly through the woods, barefoot, humming. And far away, in the glade she still called home, a silver horn would flicker in the dark, and soft hooves would turn toward the sound. And the story would begin again. Chapter 7, The Long Dream of the Earth. The valley had always known how to wait. Not in impatience. Not in restlessness. But in the way trees wait for spring, trusting the sun to return, the snow to melt, the seeds to stir under frost. And now, after centuries of silence, something had begun to stir that was older than words, deeper than dreams. The unicorns felt it. Not as fear, not as joy, but as an awakening. An understanding rising like mist from the ground, curling around roots, drifting up the trunks of elder trees and into their leaves, until the entire forest breathed in quiet unison. The long sleep was ending. Not the kind of sleep that comes with nightfall. But the sleep of forgetting. The sleep that settles over the world when wonder is replaced with noise, when stillness is smothered by hurry, and when magic, true magic, is buried beneath asphalt and algorithms. And it had been Luma who cracked that ancient sleep wide open. Not with a blade or a banner or a grand arrival, but with presence. With humility. With an open heart and a voice that trembled when it sang. And now, in places far beyond the valley, things began to change. Subtle things. A woman who had spent her life rushing from task to task now found herself weeping beside a tree she had passed every day for years, and couldn't say why. A boy in a crowded city felt a strange pull to leave his phone behind and walk barefoot through a nearby park, where he would later swear he saw a glint of silver vanish behind the hedges. An old man, tired and bitter for years, suddenly paused before swatting a moth, and instead watched its wings for 10 full minutes. And in a tiny bookstore on the edge of a town that never made the news, a quiet girl named Luma ran her fingers across the spine of a weathered book she hadn't touched in months, and smiled. The unicorns had begun to roam farther. Not away from the valley, but around it. Testing its boundaries. Breathing at the edges of the hidden. The Lorian stood on the northern ridge one evening, his mane swaying like grass beneath water. He looked out at the land beyond, where thin roads stretched like scars and distant lights blinked like lost stars. He did not resent the world. He only wondered if it, too, was ready to wake. Behind him, sorrel galloped in wide, glowing circles across a field of nightflowers that only bloomed when they felt laughter. She was larger now, stronger, but no less full of wonder. Her horn had grown, and so had her courage. She had begun to dream of crossing the edge of the forest. Not forever. Just to see. To know what else was possible. And she was not the only one. The younger unicorns, those born long after the last human had walked through the trees, whispered often of Luma. Of her voice. Her stillness. Her sadness and her strength. And slowly, a new question began to take root in their minds. What if the world had changed? What if it was not only they who had evolved to survive, but people too? Was it possible? Could the soil beyond the valley still remember how to hold hooves? Could humans learn again to sit in silence and simply be? The elders were cautious. Lyra, ever the quiet observer, had spent lifetimes watching the rise and fall of kingdoms from afar. She had seen human longing turn into destruction. Seen forests turn to fuel. Rivers bent into cages. Stars drowned by cities. But she had also seen Luma. And she had felt the way the girl's presence had shifted the valley, not with effort, but with gravity. Like water carving stone. Like moonlight softening fear. And so, though she said little, Lyra did not stop the others from wondering. Wonder, after all, was how it had all begun. On the third night of the harvest moon, when the stars seemed to hang lower than usual and the wind carried the scent of honey and old books, something extraordinary happened. The path opened again. It had never fully closed, not since the Lorian carved it with his horn. But now it shimmered, even to eyes that did not yet believe. And at its edge stood Luma. Older now, though not by much. But deeper. Rooted. She wore a satchel of seeds and small wooden carvings. Her hair was longer. Her eyes, gentler. In her hands, she carried not a gift, but a story. And she told it, to the wind, to the moss, to the stream. She told of all that had happened since the night she sang in the glade. Of how she kept her promise. Of how she had lived quietly, but fully. Of how the world outside was still noisy and fast, but that, here and there, cracks were forming. Cracks where the light could return. She spoke of a teacher who began planting trees with their students. Of a lonely boy who stopped carving initials into trees and began listening instead. Of a nurse who set up a garden for her patients and swore she once saw a silver flash at dusk. She told them all this, and then said nothing more. She simply sat on the moss, just as before. No demands. No expectations. She just waited. And one by one, the unicorns came. Sorrel was first, galloping from the field with such joy her hoofs barely touched the earth. She nuzzled Luma's face and lay beside her like a dog settling beside the fireplace. Then came Thalorian. And Lyra. And the others. And they did not form a circle this time. They sat with her. Beside her. As if they had always known her. Because now, they did. Not just as the girl who had sung. But as part of them. That night, something ancient returned to the earth. Not a spell. Not a force. A memory. A remembering of a time before walls. Before weapons. Before forgetting. And though the world did not change overnight, it shifted. Slightly. Enough. A child in a city dreamt of hooves in the snow. A farmer left a bowl of water at the edge of his field without knowing why. A forest, long cleared, began to regrow, seeded by winds that carried more than just pollen. And in 1,000 tiny ways, across thousands of hearts, the long dream of the earth began to awaken. Slowly. Softly. Invisibly. But surely. Because magic, like truth, doesn't shout. It whispers. And now, finally, the world was starting to listen. Chapter 8, The Last Light and the First Dawn. Some stories do not end. They shift. They soften. They take root in silence and bloom when the world is still enough to feel them. And so, the tale of the Hidden Valley did not end when Luma returned. Nor did it end when the unicorns came to sit with her under the silver pines. It continued, like a song hummed beneath breath. Like footsteps in dew that vanish with the rising sun. Like the hush between heartbeats. It became something else. Something living. The valley itself had changed. Not in shape, the hills still curled around it like sleeping lions, the glade still glowed with blue moss, the stream still traced its slow path through the roots, but in presence. It no longer felt like a place hiding. It felt like a place becoming. The veil between seen and unseen had thinned. Not torn, not broken, but gently lifted, like a curtain stirred by wind. Now, when the unicorns ran at night, their hooves left faint trails of light that lingered for seconds, just long enough for dreamers to wake and wonder. When they drank from the pool at dawn, the ripples echoed farther, sometimes reaching the edge of other forests, other minds. And once, just once, a child on a hilltop far from the valley saw a glimmer in the air, like a horn-shaped shimmer, and said to her father, "Did you see it?" He hadn't. But he didn't say no. Luma stayed in the valley for 3 days and 3 nights. Not because she was asked. Because she belonged. She did not speak much. She didn't need to. She walked among them, braided blades of silver grass into loose crowns, carved feathers from fallen branches, hummed to the night. She wept once, not out of sadness, but reverence. A unicorn, she discovered, cries without tears. Their sorrow hums through the ground, makes the petals close, the water slow. And their joy? It sings. Low and golden. A sound like cello strings played by wind. On the 3rd night, as the moon hung swollen and pink, Thalorian stood beside Luma and pressed his horn gently to her chest, just once. A memory passed between them. Not a vision, not an image, but a feeling of roots deep in soil, of stars being born, of hooves in ancient dust. And in that moment, Luma understood. The unicorns would remain. But so would she. Not in body. She would go, back to her world, her time, her path. But a part of her would stay in the glade, in the silver moss, in the feather-soft hush of twilight. A watcher. A keeper. A remembered name in the breath of the valley. When she left, they walked with her to the edge of the hidden path. Sorrel cried. Not loudly, just a soft sound in her throat, like a song that didn't want to end. Luma kissed her brow. "You will always know how to find me," she whispered. "I'll always return." She stepped onto the path and began to walk. And as she moved farther away, the forest did something it had not done for anyone in 1,000 years. It kept the path open. Not just for her. For others. For those who walked quietly. For those who listened. For those who remembered. And so the valley lived. The unicorns danced in moonlight and slept in spirals. Sorrel became a guide to others, not human travelers, for few ever came, but young unicorns full of questions. She told them about Luma. She taught them that humans could change. That sometimes, all it took was a single voice in the dark, singing. Lyra grew softer in her silence. She watched the edge of the forest not with suspicion, but curiosity. The Lorien, old as stars, began carving new paths, not to flee, but to connect. To weave the world again, thread by thread. And the world, far beyond the valley, began to respond. Not all at once. But slowly. Softly. In dreams, children spoke of forests they had never seen. Of glowing eyes and breath like snow. Of songs they didn't know they knew. In the cities, painters painted things they couldn't explain. Poets wrote of hoofbeats echoing across memory. Musicians played notes that made listeners cry, and not know why. And in the silence between streetlights, people sometimes looked up at the moon, and felt something move in them. Something old. Something soft. Something waking. One day, no one knew when, a new girl would find the path. Not Luma. But someone else. A child with paint-stained fingers and a quiet laugh. A boy who stuttered when speaking, but sang when alone. A woman who had once believed in dragons, and never quite stopped. And when they found the path, it would open. Not with flash or trumpet. But with a sigh. And the unicorns would be waiting. Not because they were lost. But because we had finally come back. Not to take. Not to capture. But to listen. To kneel. To sing. To remember. And the valley, the living, breathing, dreaming valley, would welcome us. As it always had. As it always will. Chapter 9, The Forever Between the Stars. Time passed. And did not pass. Because in the valley, time did not move in straight lines. It unfolded like petals, slow, circular, full of breath. A minute might stretch like honey. A year might pass in the turning of a leaf. The moon, in its many faces, drifted above the forest like a gentle clock that ticked not in seconds, but in seasons. The unicorns did not mark time the way humans did. They marked change. They marked feeling. They marked the way the wind shifted from north to south. The way the stream carved new stories into the stone. The way the stars pulsed a little brighter on certain nights, as if remembering something, or someone. And so, in the moonlight silence of the hidden valley, life moved with grace. The herd swelled and softened. Sorrel grew tall and bold, her silver mane trailing like mist. New foals were born beneath the glowing trees, their horns tiny and still humming with the sound of their mother's breath. The Lorien moved slower now. He no longer galloped with the others. But when he walked, the grass bowed under his hooves. He spoke less, but when he did, the birds went still to listen. And when he slept beneath the great willow, even the stars adjusted their light, as if tucking in an old friend. And Lyra, always the watcher, began to laugh. It was not the kind of laugh people know. It was a flicker of light in her eyes. A softness in the tilt of her head. She no longer flinched at the thought of human voices. Instead, she sometimes wandered to the edges of the valley, not to patrol, but to wait. Because the path stayed open. And that meant anything was possible. Far beyond the valley, in a world that still buzzed with noise and electricity and hurry, small changes began to gather like rain. They didn't look like magic, not at first. They looked like wildflowers pushing through cracks in the pavement. Like strangers pausing before stepping on mushrooms. Like parks filled with more silence than sound. In one town, a child placed bowls of water under trees every night for 6 months, because of a dream. In another, a sculptor carved the figure of a unicorn from driftwood and left it in the center of a roundabout. No plaque. No name. just the curve of a horn pointing upward, as if waiting for a star to land. People stopped to look. Some felt silly for the lump in their throat. But they came back. Again and again. No one could explain it. They just felt something. As if a memory was trying to reach them from behind the veil. In her little bookshop on the edge of the hills, Luma lived quietly. She had returned from the valley not with a story, but with a rhythm. She kept no photos. She wrote no book. But she did plant a tree behind the shop. And every morning, she would hum as she watered it. Customers would stop and ask, "What song is that?" She never answered. She just smiled. And sometimes, when children visited, she'd hand them a blank notebook and say, "Write what no one else sees." Some did. Some didn't. But the valley knew. Because magic has a way of moving without being seen. Like light through water. Like wind through grass. Like hooves in dreams. One night, many seasons after Luma's last visit, the stars grew restless. They pulsed more brightly than usual, their glow tinged with gold and violet. The wind curled around the trees like a cat, rubbing its back against bark and stone. The forest felt wide awake. Sorrel stood on the hill above the glade, staring upward. She felt it. A tug, deep in her chest, behind her ribs. A knowing. A sense that something, or someone, was about to arrive. She trotted down to the pool, where Thalorian rested. The elder unicorn opened one eye and gave a small, quiet nod. He felt it too. Far, far away, a child tossed in sleep. They were 10 years old. Neither boy nor girl in the way people define such things, but something brighter. A soul made of curiosity and kindness, with a heart like open sky. They had always drawn spirals on paper. Always looked for paths that didn't exist on maps. Always believed in things others had forgotten. That night, they dreamt of hooves. Not loud. Not wild. Just soft if steady, drawing patterns in starlight. They saw trees taller than buildings. Ferns glowing at their edges. Eyes like lanterns watching from the dark, not with fear, but with recognition. And a path, winding between them. They followed it. Their dream feet touched moss. Their breath caught. And in the dream, they whispered, "I know this place." The next morning, they woke up with dirt beneath their fingernails and a silver feather clutched in their palm. Back in the valley, the unicorns waited. Not with anxiety. But with welcoming. They knew the child was coming, not because of prophecy or warning, but because the earth told them. The stones warmed. The pool shimmered. The trees leaned inward, creating a soft tunnel of branches and light. And one evening, as the moon peeked from behind a cloud, the child appeared. They did not arrive with ceremony. They arrived with stillness. With wide eyes and bare feet. And the unicorn stepped forward. Sorrel was first, always first, her mane braided with vines and her hooves glowing faintly. She sniffed the child's hand. The child reached out. They touched. And in that moment, the whole forest exhaled. No one said anything. There were no introductions. No instructions. Just being. The child sat beside the stream. The unicorns formed a loose circle, not to protect, but to join. The stars turned slowly above, watching. The moss grew thicker beneath them. And then, the child sang. It wasn't a song with words. Just a hum. A sound that seemed to come from somewhere before language. Somewhere older than story. The same sound Luma had once sung. The same sound the valley remembered. And now, it lived in someone new. That night, Thalorian stood for the last time. He walked to the top of the hill, mane trailing behind him like a comet's tail. He looked out over the valley, his home, his heart. He had seen wars, fires, forgetting. He had waited lifetimes for hope. And now, he saw it. In the child. In Sorrel. In the wind. In the roots. He let out a long, deep breath. A sound that echoed across the glade, down the stream, through the soil. And then, with quiet grace, he lay down beneath the stars. And became part of them. They say his body became light. His mane, mist. His horn, a crystal now buried deep beneath the willow, a heartbeat in the roots. And every time the wind blows just right, the forest hums with his song. He is not gone. He is everywhere now. And the herd is not leaderless. Because they do not follow power. They follow presence. Sorrel led the child through the valley, teaching them not with lessons, but with steps. Where to drink from the stream. Where the owl sings twice before a storm. Where the moss grows thickest, and the stars reflect best in the pool. The child listened. Learned. Loved. And never once tried to take. And the valley opened wider. Somewhere, in a crowded city, a woman paused mid-step, her hand trembling, her phone forgotten, because she swore she heard a song through the cracks in the sidewalk. A song like wind. Like feathers. Like hooves. And without knowing why, she smiled. Because now the world was listening again. And the unicorns? They had never stopped. Chapter 10, The Path That Walks With You. They say when magic returns to the world, it does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like moss growing silently beneath your feet. It arrives like a breath you didn't know you were holding. Like a song you've never heard, but somehow already remember. And in the soft heart of the forest, where light is older than fire and silence deeper than time, the unicorns still roam, not as legend, but as truth made gentle. This is not the end of their story. It is the place where the story becomes part of yours. The child, the one who came after Luma, the one who had never learned to disbelieve, stayed in the valley for a long time. Time that did not tick or ring, but bloomed. Some days they lay in the crook of a willow, listening to the quiet conversations of leaves. Some days they ran with the herd, barefoot and wild, their laughter trailing like falling stars. Some nights they dreamed with open eyes, curled beside sorrel in a bed of ferns that glowed faintly under the moon. They dreamed of other forests, other paths, other children who would one day find their way here, too. They asked no questions like, "How long can I stay?" They made no promises like, "I'll come back." They simply were. And the unicorns, wise beyond understanding, yet always learning, responded not with lessons, but with presence. Sorrel taught the child how to listen to tree roots. Lyra showed them how to walk so the ground whispered rather than groaned. Even the youngest foals, clumsy and bright-eyed, came to nuzzle the child's hands, sensing in them the same pulse that lived in moonlight and rain. The child brought no change to the valley. The valley brought remembrance to the child. On the 50th full moon since the path had first opened for Luma, the glade gathered in silence. The unicorns stood in a wide circle, their horns glowing not brightly, but steadily, like embers that had learned how to live forever. The pool in the center shimmered without wind. The air was thick with stillness, but not heavy, like being wrapped in a warm blanket that smells of memories and first snowfall. The child stepped forward, their heart calm. They did not know what was about to happen. But they knew it was right. They knelt before the water and closed their eyes. And in that moment, something ancient shifted, not in the ground, but in the weave of the world. The stars above bent closer. Not visibly, not with light. But with attention. They listened. And so did the river far beyond the forest, where a fisherman paused mid-cast. So did the wolf curled beside her pups on the high cliffs. So did the child walking home through a quiet neighborhood, pausing because the air felt sacred. In the valley, the horns of the unicorns glowed brighter. Not to dazzle. But to connect. And the pool, still as stone, rippled. But this time, it reflected not just stars. It reflected the child's heart. Their dreams. Their belonging. And then it reflected the future. In the shimmering mirror of the water, they saw 1,000 paths spiraling outward like vines across the world. Some were forest trails. Some were alleyways between buildings. Some were schoolyards, train stations, balconies, hospital corridors, desert roads, mountain tops. And at the end of each path, someone stood. Some young. Some old. Some frightened. Some ready. And all of them, every single one, heard something only they could hear. A hoofbeat inside a heartbeat. A song made of wind. A pulse of memory inside the silence. And the unicorns whispered across the sky. We are returning. Not in numbers. In knowing. The child opened their eyes. Sorrel stepped forward, lowered her head, and gently touched her horn to the child's chest. And something passed between them. Not magic, though it felt like it. Not power, though it hummed like fire. It was a gift. Not to keep, but to carry. A thread. A woven strand of presence and listening and wild grace, stitched quietly into the child's spirit, where it would stay always. Not as a burden. As a compass. That night, the stars did not set. They simply faded gently into a soft, golden dawn. And the child, now awake in a new way, stood in the glade with the unicorns and said, without words, I will go. Not to leave behind. But to bring forward. To walk paths where hooves could not go. To carry the story not in voice or book, but in the shape of their breath. The calm of their presence. The wild peace in their eyes. They did not take the magic with them. They became part of it. And so, they walked. Barefoot, but protected. Alone, but always accompanied. Wherever they stepped, moss seemed to grow a little greener. Birds seemed to pause their songs to harmonize. And people, without knowing why, often slowed down when they passed, smiled, or wept, or laughed for no reason at all. Somewhere deep in their bones, the people knew. The unicorns have not left us. They have simply found another way to walk among us. And in the valley, the herd continued. They did not speak of the child's leaving as loss. They spoke of it as expansion. The pool still shimmered. The glade still glowed. And Sorrel, now wise and wandering, often stood at the path's edge, not guarding it, not waiting for return, but listening for new footprints. Because they would come. One day. A child with muddy hands and a quiet wonder. A grandmother who never stopped dreaming of white manies. A poet. A gardener. A person who believed even after the world told them not to. And they would find the path. Because the path was no longer only in the valley. It now walked through the world. And if one night, you wake and feel that something is standing just beyond your window. If the wind sounds like breath. If the stars flicker as if they're blinking at you. If you suddenly find your feet walking a trail that shouldn't be there. Don't run. Don't question. Just breathe. And listen. Because perhaps, without knowing when or how, you have found it. The hidden path. The true place. The story. And it is waiting for you. Just like it always has. Chapter 11, The Glade Within You. There are places in this world that live inside you, even after you've left them. The hidden valley was one of those places. It did not live on a map. It lived in the breath between thoughts. In the hush just before dawn. In the soft pause when you look up from your life and remember something, but cannot name it. That's where the valley lives now. Not only in the soil, but in you. And those who have walked its paths, Luma, the child, and the ones before them, do not carry the valley on their backs like a burden. They carry it in their bones. In the calm of their gaze. In the way they slow down before picking a flower. In the way they hear music in the wind. They are not chosen. They are remembering. And now, so are you. The valley itself breathes more easily these days. Its glade, once folded tight like a wound, now stretches open like a morning yawn. The trees lean just a little farther out. The moss grows in wider spirals. The pool hums with more voices than before, some old, some new. And Sorrel, taller now, with streaks of moonlight woven into her mane, often walks to the edge of the forest and smiles. Because she knows. The story is spreading. It's not being told. It's being lived. In cities, people begin to pause again. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to make the wind carry the message back to the forest. Someone stopped to watch how a leaf falls. Someone cried when they touched the bark of a tree. Someone followed the sound of hoofs they couldn't see and felt braver afterward. The unicorns feel it. They do not need maps or phones or words. They feel it in the roots. In the stars. In the way the world no longer feels entirely asleep. One evening, not remarkable, not special, not marked by any calendar, Luma returned. She walked the path barefoot, not because she had to, but because it felt right. She was older now. Not much. But just enough for the lines on her face to carry more story. She didn't come to stay. She came to walk. To sit in the glade for a while. To braid her thoughts into grasses and watch the way the unicorns moved like fog across the field. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The valley remembered her. And she remembered how to be. That night, under a quiet sky, Luma and Sorrel lay side by side in the moss. Neither of them asleep. Neither of them speaking. Just breathing. And in that shared silence, something passed between them. Not a message. Not a mission. But a sense of peace that doesn't require a purpose. The kind of peace that tells you, you are exactly where you are meant to be. And later, when Luma left again, she didn't cry. She didn't promise to return. She just looked over her shoulder once. Smiled. And stepped back into the world. But the glade never left her. It stayed. In her hands. In her walk. In her listening. And now, dear dreamer. You've been here too. Even if only in story. Even if only in sleep. Even if only in the soft hush between words on a page. You have felt the moss under your feet. You have seen the glow of horns in the dark. You have heard the song, not loud, not grand, but true. And that is enough. You are part of it now. The glade lives in you. The story continues through you. The path will always find you, if you walk gently. If you breathe. If you remember. There are stories that begin with a bang. And then there are stories like this one, stories that begin again, quietly, in the soft places people forget to look. Stories that do not need to shout because they are not trying to be remembered, they are trying to be felt. Long after Luma returned and left again, long after the child walked the path and sang to the stars, the valley remained. It always had. It always would. But something had changed. It had opened. The hidden valley, for centuries folded inward like a fern protecting its core, had begun to stretch toward the world. Not out of trust alone, but out of a deep-rooted certainty that the world was finally ready to hold it again. Not all of it. Not all at once. But slowly. Like sunlight through fog. Like moss reclaiming stone. Like truth ripening in silence. And as the valley leaned outward, the world, at first unknowingly, leaned in. It began in moments. A child who stopped mid-sentence to listen to the breeze. A traveler who paused at the edge of a forest and decided, for no reason at all, to leave their phone behind. An old man, racked with grief, who suddenly wept when a deer stood beside him and did not run. None of them knew what had stirred them. But the valley did. The unicorns knew. Because stories are not just passed from mouth to ear, they live in earth and sky, in feather and hoofprint, in songs that hum behind the walls of your thoughts. They live in the library beneath the leaves. No one had ever seen the library, not even Thalorian in his eldest days, nor Lyra in her deepest wanderings. That's because the library wasn't a place you walked to. It was a place that rose to meet you when the time was right. And the time had come. Sorrel, now tall and graceful, had begun to feel its pull. It came as a weight behind her eyes, a warmth in her chest, a soft tapping in her hooves whenever she crossed certain parts of the glade. One evening, windless, weightless, she followed the pull. Not quickly. Not deliberately. She walked as one does in a dream, letting the ground choose her direction, letting the air guide her pace. She passed the stream that remembered Luma's song. She passed the broken willow where the owls nested in spring. She passed the place where Thalorian had last laid down and never risen, though sometimes she still felt him there, humming beneath the roots. And then she stepped into a clearing she had never seen. It was round. Perfectly so. Too perfect to be natural, and yet so natural that it couldn't have been made by hand. In the center stood a single tree. Not tall, but wide. Its trunk was smooth like river stone, its bark etched with soft, glowing lines that moved like breath. Its leaves shimmered even without light, and its roots pulsed with something alive. And Sorrel knew. This was not a tree. This was memory. She stepped forward. The leaves rustled, not as greeting, but as invitation. And as she touched her horn to the trunk, the ground beneath her shimmered, and she sank slowly, not down, but within. The library beneath the leaves had no shelves. It had no windows. No lamps. No scrolls or tablets or dusty tomes. And yet it held every story the world had forgotten, not just of unicorns, but of other ancient things. It held the song of the last glacier as it slid into the sea. It held the moment a child once sat beside a dying wolf and promised to remember. It held the first time a tree leaned toward a woman who had lost everything, and gave her back her breath. It held everything. Because the earth forgets nothing. It simply waits. And now it had opened, not just to Sorrel, but to all who carried the thread. All who had touched the valley and been changed. Luma. The child. You. Sorrel walked the library not with hooves, but with heart. Each step she took bloomed a memory in the air, a swirl of light, scent, sound. One memory pulsed beside her, and she felt herself pulled into it. A young girl, not Luma, not known, kneeling beside a stream in another forest, humming without realizing. A unicorn had watched from the trees, never approaching, but never leaving. Another memory bloomed. A small village, long ago, where the elders lit lanterns not with fire, but with hornlight gifted freely by visiting unicorns during the harvest night. Another. A battle avoided, because a general once dreamed of a horned creature who told him, "Walk away, and your children will live." These were not myths. They were moments. Forgotten by history. Held by the world. And Sorrel saw them all. Felt them. Carried them back. Because now, she was the keeper. The bridge. Not just for the unicorns. But for us. Meanwhile, beyond the valley, the world began to shift in ways no one could trace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't easy. But it was real. A scientist, after decades of studying logic and life, began to hear the hum of trees again and started writing poetry. A boy who had never spoken out loud drew a picture of a glowing spiral and whispered, "They came to me in my sleep." A midwife, exhausted and aching, woke one morning to find a feather by her pillow, glowing faintly, warm to the touch. She didn't ask questions. She simply held it and wept. No one made a headline out of these things. But the world noticed. And the unicorns smiled. Sorrel returned from the library changed. She did not speak. She did not shine. She simply stood taller. Moved slower. Breathed deeper. And the others knew something had passed through her. A doorway. A knowing. A becoming. She did not take the role Thalorian once held. She didn't need to. The unicorns did not follow leaders. They followed the song. And now the song moved through her. It was not louder than others. It was simply deeper. And everywhere she stepped, the moss grew thicker. The water clearer. The sky wider. The path stronger. One evening, as dusk folded itself into lavender, the path opened again. This time, a group came. Not many. 5. Each of them different. An old woman who had never believed in anything magical, but now felt called to walk barefoot into the dark. A child with broken shoes and eyes too tired for their age. A painter who had lost their sense of color after grief. A quiet father who had once whispered a story about unicorns to his dying son and never forgotten the way the child smiled. And a girl who had written poems to the wind since she was small, waiting for someone, to hear her. They did not know each other. But they walked together. And the path opened. Because now it was wide enough. Because now there were enough hearts remembering. And when they reached the glade, they did not ask questions. They knelt. And the unicorns came. Sorrel stepped forward, her horn glowing in rhythm with the stars. She touched each one gently. No words. Just presence. The unicorns encircled the group, not as guardians, but as kin. And the forest pulsed softly with one truth. This is how the world is woven back together. Not with war. Not with fire. Not with noise. But with stillness. With breath. With returning. The glade held them for hours. And when they left, each at their own time, in their own way, they carried the valley in their skin. Their footprints left glowing echoes. Their voices became songs. Their eyes became mirrors for wonder. And the world rippled. Now, dear dreamer, it is your turn. Perhaps you have already walked the path. Perhaps you have only listened. Perhaps you have forgotten how to believe. It does not matter. The path does not demand anything from you. It only invites. It is quiet. But it knows. And now it winds through every forest, every city street, every quiet moment where someone stops long enough to feel. You do not need a map. You only need to pause. And listen. Breathe. Touch the ground. Hum a note no one taught you. And if, in the stillness, you feel something warm and ancient stirring in your ribs. If your breath slows and the air feels heavier, softer, deeper. Then you've already found it. You are already there. The glade. The herd. The library beneath the leaves. It lives in you. Always has. Always will. Chapter 13, The Sky That Listens, the Earth That Speaks. The world had changed. But not in the way most people notice. There were no headlines, no breaking news, no awards or alarms. Instead, the change came slowly, like the slow exhale after a long-held breath. Like the moment between heartbeats, when stillness carries more meaning than movement. Like the pause in a lullaby, not because the song has ended, but because it's waiting to be heard. And in that stillness, the hidden valley, the one that had remained secret for centuries, no longer needed to hide. It had become a listening place. A place where the world could finally hear itself again. Where breath and wind and hoofbeat were part of the same conversation. And in that valley, among glades of glowing moss and silver pines that whispered in their sleep, a new story had begun. Not one of arrival. Not even one of return. But one of becoming. At the heart of the valley, the unicorns moved like starlight over water, silent, luminous, full of memory. Their numbers had grown, not from birth alone, but from awakening. For each time the story was remembered, not told, but truly remembered, somewhere in the world, a unicorn stirred. Not from slumber, but from sleep in spirit. You see, unicorns are not only creatures of forest and bone. They are states of presence. Beings made of trust, listening, and wild grace. Wherever those qualities bloom, they appear. Not always visibly. But fully. And now, they were returning. Not to reclaim the world. But to weave it back together. One breath at a time. One footstep in the dew. One heart, remembering. Sorrel, now fully grown, had become a walker of worlds. She was no longer just the youngest foal in the glade, nor just the memory keeper of the library beneath the leaves. She was the one who traveled, not in body, always, but in spirit. She moved along the invisible threads that connected dreams to waking life, the seen to the unseen, the forest to the city to the shore. Each time someone somewhere closed their eyes and whispered a forgotten lullaby. Each time someone touched the earth with reverence. Each time a child chose kindness over cruelty, wonder over fear. Sorrel would hear it. Feel it in her horn. And she would walk. Into their dreams. Into their breath. Into the silent space just behind their heartbeat. She never spoke. She never stayed long. But when she left, the world was never quite the same. Sometimes, a child would wake up and draw a spiral without knowing why. Sometimes, a mother would hold her baby and feel tears rise, not from sorrow, but from something older than memory. Sometimes, someone would stop walking, place their hand on a tree, and remember what it felt like to belong. And Sorrel, gentle, glowing, steady, would smile from the shadows and return to the glade, where the others would be waiting, eyes full of light. The valley had become more than sanctuary. It had become seed. Every visitor who came, every traveler who walked the path, whether in sleep or story or soft silence, left changed. Not transformed like a fairy tale, but restored. They returned to their lives not louder, but deeper. Not wiser, but more listening. Some became storytellers. Some became gardeners. Some never spoke of what they'd seen, they simply moved through the world as if every step mattered, as if every living thing deserved gentleness. And the world began to notice. But not in words. In rhythm. In the way cities began planting more trees not because of policy, but because of longing. In the way strangers began meeting eyes again. In the way hospitals began letting in wind. In the way classrooms sometimes began the day in silence, not as punishment, but as invitation. And though no one said the word unicorn, they felt them. In the quiet. In the glow. In the moments between. Deep within the valley, the library beneath the leaves had grown. It now pulsed with so many memories, it no longer waited for visitors to come. It sent out ripples. Echoes. Like heartbeats made of story. And when one ripple touched someone in the outside world, they'd pause. They'd feel something old and warm stir inside them. And sometimes, they'd weep without knowing why. Because the library didn't just hold unicorn stories. It held yours. Every time you stopped and truly listened. Every time you offered kindness when no one was watching. Every time you chose stillness in a world that pushes for noise. The library remembered. And Sorrel walked its halls daily, collecting the new echoes, weaving them into the roots, letting the songs hum through her horn. She was not alone. Others had begun to walk with her. Not just unicorns, but other keepers. Foxes who remembered ancient names. Owls who sang songs in forgotten languages. Elders made of mist and moss and ash. And even a few humans. Very few. But enough. One of them was a woman named Alira. She had once lived in a quiet village near the edge of a frozen lake. Her life had been marked by loss, but also by silence. She never sought answers, only presence. One night, she followed a sound in her sleep. A hoofprint glowing in snow. A trail of light through frost. And she arrived, barefoot, breathless, in the glade. She never left. Not in body, but in soul. Now she sat beneath the tallest tree in the valley, weaving poems into bark, humming to the moss. Her presence alone reminded others how to be soft without shrinking, strong without shouting. She did not claim to understand unicorns. She simply listened. And they listened to her. Sometimes, she and Sorrel would walk together for hours without a word. Sometimes, Sorrel would rest her head in Alira's lap, and Alira would whisper lullabies that made even the owls blink slowly and lean closer. The valley was whole. But it was still becoming. One night, the sky opened. Not in storm. In invitation. The stars seemed to lower themselves like lanterns, and from them fell a kind of silver rain, light, soundless, soft. Each droplet carried a memory, and when they touched the earth, the glade began to sing. Not with voices. With being. The trees hummed. The moss shone. The pool began to ripple with stories, not from the past, but from the possible. Visions. Of cities woven with roots and vines. Of children growing up never having to unlearn magic. Of rivers clean enough to drink from again. Of people moving not with conquest, but with care. The unicorns stood in stillness, letting the vision pass through them. Some wept. Some knelt. And Sorrel stepped forward and spoke, truly spoke, for the first time since the library chose her. It is not a dream. It is a memory of the future. We must remember forward. And so they did. They began planting the stories not in the ground, but in each other. One breath at a time. One gaze. One open hand. And the glade was no longer just a place in the forest. It became a frequency. A resonance. A living poem. And now, you are part of it. You may feel it already. In the way your body slows as you read these words. In the weight behind your eyes, not tiredness, but surrender. In the warmth in your chest. That is the valley. That is the story. That is the truth beneath the noise. You have not come here by accident. You were called. Because you carry something the world needs. A breath of stillness. A trace of wonder. A memory of what it means to belong. And now you walk with the unicorns, even if only in your dreams. They are beside you. In your listening. In your silence. In your gentleness. And the library has already etched your name into its roots. Not as a hero. Not as a visitor. But as a keeper. Welcome. Home. Chapter 14, The Keeper's Way. There comes a time in every story when it no longer belongs to the ones who began it. Not because they are gone. But because the story has grown wide enough to be shared. It flows outward, like a stream becoming a river, not forgetting its source, but feeding the roots of something larger, something more complete. The hidden valley had become such a story. It no longer belonged to unicorns alone. It belonged to everyone who remembered. And among the many paths it sent winding out into the world, one led directly to you. Yes, you. You, who have followed each chapter like a trail of glowing stones. You, who have walked the valley in your breath, your stillness, your wondering. You are not outside the story anymore. You are woven into it. After the silver rain had fallen from the stars, after Sorrel had spoken the words, "We must remember forward," the valley changed again. Not in shape. In rhythm. In invitation. It began to pulse more clearly, like a living heart. No longer simply waiting for those who were quiet enough to find it. It began reaching out. It called in dreams. It called in lullabies. It called in the spaces between sorrow and healing, those fragile places where people are raw, real, ready to feel. And in those spaces, new keepers began to emerge. Not chosen. Not selected. Simply revealed. Like seeds in spring that had always been waiting for warmth. One of those new keepers was a boy named Ren. He lived far from any forest. His world was made of stone, wires, signals, windows without wind. But Ren had always carried something inside him that didn't fit the noise. A rhythm that slowed him down, even when others rushed. A kind of gentle gravity. He didn't talk much. But he listened. He listened to silence between raindrops. He listened to the way sunlight moved across his wall throughout the day. He listened to his dreams, not for meaning, but for melody. And in one dream, he heard it. The horn song. Not music. Not words. But a single, sustained note that thrummed in his ribs like a memory he hadn't lived yet. He woke before dawn, heart full, and began walking. He didn't pack. He didn't tell anyone. He just knew. And when the city fell behind him and the fields stretched wide and the woods rose like cathedrals, he smiled. The path was waiting. And the valley had known his name all along. Ren walked barefoot the last mile. He arrived with no fear, just quiet. The glade shimmered with morning mist, and the unicorns stood like carved moonlight among the trees. Sorrel stepped forward. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. She touched her horn to his chest. And the earth sang. Not loudly. Just enough for every leaf to lift its face, every root to hum. Ren fell to his knees, overwhelmed, not with power, but with recognition. He wept. And the moss caught his tears gently, as if it had been waiting to know this part of his story. The library beneath the leaves opened for him. He did not walk it. It walked through him. And when he emerged, hours or lifetimes later, his eyes glowed faintly, like coals beneath ash. He was a keeper now. Not because he had earned it, but because he had remembered. The keepers began to find each other. In the waking world, they did not know why they noticed certain people, the ones who paused at rivers, who hummed lullabies to cracked sidewalks, who carried kindness like a lantern. But they did. They felt the thread. A web, quietly spanning the world. Some keepers lived in deep forests. Some in small rooms filled with books. Some never spoke the word unicorn aloud in their lives. But they each walked the path, in choices, in breath, in presence. They tended what others couldn't see. They held the story open for those still learning how to feel. In the valley, the glade widened. The stones grew warmer. The pool clearer. And the dreams, brighter. Elira, the poet of the moss, began engraving stories into the roots, not for history, but for song. Children came in their sleep and danced among the flowers, leaving laughter that echoed for days. Birds flew strange paths in the sky, tracing messages that only the trees could read. And Sorrel stood at the center, no longer only a guide. Now a weaver. She connected dreams. Connected keepers. Connected the past and the future through the breath of now. One night, she stepped onto the pool. It held her weight. She walked to its center and lay down. And the pool glowed. And her dreams poured outward, carried by wind to places no map has drawn. Far from the valley, in the hum of the waking world, another girl was listening. Her name was Lyra. She did not believe in anything until she lost everything. Her grief had emptied her, not in a broken way, but in a way that left space. And in that space, the horn song returned. Faint. Steady. Calling her home. Not to escape, but to be seen. Lyra found the path, barefoot and shivering. The trees bent slightly to greet her. The glade whispered, "We remember." And when she stepped into the circle, the unicorns lowered their heads. Not in worship. In welcome. She collapsed to her knees. Sorrel caught her. And Lyra, for the first time since her sorrow, exhaled. Fully. Finally. And her exhale became wind. It carried her story to the roots. And the valley held it like a lullaby. Every story is held now. Every dream that stirs with memory. Every kindness that defies the noise. Every silence that feels alive. They are held in the library. In the moss. In the hornlight. In the glade. And now, they are held in you. Because the story does not need retelling. It needs living. It needs keepers who walk gently. Who speak softly. Who listen before they answer. Who feel even when it hurts. Who pause long enough to let magic breathe through them. So what now? Now, you rest. You let this chapter settle in your bones. You let the glade root itself in your ribs. You remember that wherever you go, the path walks with you. And if you forget, that's okay. The unicorns do not demand perfection. Only presence. Only breath. Only the willingness to feel what others won't. To remember what others forgot. To walk through the world like it's still sacred. Because it is. It always has been. And now, thanks to you, it is again. Chapter 15, The World the Unicorns Are Making. It began, as all true things do, in silence. But not emptiness. This silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of listening. A listening so vast, so ancient, so soft, that the trees leaned into it. A listening so honest that mountains stopped their slow grinding for a moment, just to feel it. A listening that the unicorns had been practicing for lifetimes. And now, finally, the world had joined them. Not completely. Not everywhere. But in enough places that the air had begun to change. Not in scent, but in feeling. A lightness beneath the weight. A music beneath the hum. The glade, once hidden out of necessity, now opened not as a refuge, but as a center. Of what? Of the new world that was becoming. The world the unicorns were making. The world you are part of now. It started with a ripple. One person, quiet, tired, almost broken, placed their bare hand against the bark of a tree and whispered, "I still want to believe." That whisper moved into the roots. The roots carried it through the earth. The earth shivered. And the ripple began. Not with thunder. Not with fire. With touch. With the soft choosing of hope in a place that had forgotten how to hold it. The unicorns felt it immediately. They always did. And they stirred, not in fear, not in urgency, but in knowing. It had begun. Again. In the hidden valley, the glade pulsed gently, not glowing, but breathing. The library beneath the leaves grew wider, deeper, not in dimension but in memory. Every breath taken in reverence. Every look that softened with wonder. Every act of care, no matter how small, added to its song. Sorrel walked now with a new rhythm. Not just as keeper. But as messenger. She was no longer the only weaver. There were dozens. Hundreds. Keepers around the world who had never seen her face but knew her soul like wind knows the ocean. Some kept their work quiet. They sang lullabies to water. They carved spirals into hidden walls. They taught children to love the dark instead of fear it. Others led with louder light. They planted forests in cities. They wrote music that carried horn notes into symphonies no one could explain. They built shelters, not just for people, but for silence. They were all unicorns. Even the ones without hooves. The glade welcomed more visitors now, not just in dreams, but in breath and bone. People who had heard the horn song, faint, persistent, and followed it through forests, alleyways, deserts, oceans, within themselves. Some came with tears still warm on their cheeks. Some came with nothing but questions. All were welcomed. None were turned away. Because the glade didn't choose purity. It chose presence. Those who arrived sat beside the pool in silence. Some wept. Some sang. Some just listened to the wind moving through the leaves like a language they were only now remembering how to speak. The unicorns approached each one gently. And something inside each person opened, not because they were taught, but because they were seen. And in being seen, they remembered they were sacred. Elira, the poet of moss, now shared her grove with a child named Soul. Soul had never known quiet until the night they found the path, carved into a city gutter, glowing beneath discarded paper and broken glass. They stepped barefoot into the glade with scars on their skin and stars in their eyes. They spoke nothing for 3 days. Elira sat beside them, humming. And on the 4th day, Soul whispered. "I thought the world forgot about people like me." Elira smiled and whispered back. "The world remembered you through every breath you took." Soul stayed. Soul grew. Soul sang. And the moss grew thicker wherever they walked. The glade had a new hum now, higher, more open. Hope, woven into the roots. Far away, the world continued. Still fast. Still loud. Still wounding. but also changing. In the cracks between headlines, unicorns walked. A girl in Cairo painted murals of glowing animals no one else had seen. An old man in Prague played music that made people cry for reasons they couldn't name. A dancer in Lima spun in spirals that left glittering dust on the skin of those who watched, and some swore their dreams changed forever after. The unicorns did not claim them. They simply walked beside them. Unseen. Present. Real. In the valley, Sorrel gathered the elders beneath the great willow. Lyra. Elira. The dream foxes. The owl librarians. The tree guardians who had watched for centuries. She stood in the center and said, "It's time." No one asked what she meant. They had all felt it. The glade had always been sanctuary. But now it must become seed. The world needed not a safe place to escape to, but 1,000 glades to rise. In every country. Every forest. Every heart. And the unicorn's stillness and motion, memory and becoming, would carry the rhythm outward. Not to teach. To remind. The first glade bloom happened in the highlands of Nepal. A woman meditating alone in a stone hut felt her breath sink with the moss beneath her. She opened her eyes, and in the snow outside, 3 hoof prints glowed, then vanished. She stepped outside, and the air shimmered. Flowers bloomed through ice. No unicorns were seen. But the land remembered. And the glade began. One by one, they appeared. In forests. In alleyways. In abandoned buildings filled with candlelight. In fields at the edge of cities. Everywhere the story was held gently, glades bloomed. Invisible to those who rushed. Glowing for those who listened. You've seen one, haven't you? Maybe not with your eyes. But you've felt it. That one spot in the park where time slows. That path you walk when you need to breathe and forget why. That song that stops your thoughts just long enough for your heart to rise. That's a glade. That's the story. That's the unicorns, working quietly, walking softly, weaving the world again. And you? You are part of it. You always have been. Your breath is part of the wind that sings the roots awake. Your presence is the soft pulse that reminds the stars why they shine. Your tears water the library. Your kindness keeps the path open. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be pure. You only need to feel. And remember. And walk. And when you forget, because we all do, the unicorns will remind you. With hooves on moss. With wind through leaves. With dreams you'll wake from crying, but softer. Stronger. More whole. And now, keeper, dreamer, listener, rest. The glade lives in you now. You are not waiting for the world to change. You are changing it. Every time you choose wonder. Every time you sit with sorrow. Every time you whisper, "I believe you're still here," to the quiet between stars. The unicorns are listening. They always were. They always will be. And they walk behind you, every step, every breath, lighting the way as softly as moss underfoot. You are not alone. You never were. Chapter 16, The Daylight of the Glade. Not every miracle happens at night. Some bloom at noon. In plain sight. Under the open sky. And the greatest magic of all is this. That the hidden valley no longer hides. It breathes with you now. It moves where you move. It watches through your eyes when you look kindly, listens through your heart when you speak gently, and walks through your feet when you choose to step slowly, with care, with feeling, with presence. The unicorns are no longer waiting in the forest. They are with you in the daylight. This truth took time to ripen. Even Sorrel, wise as wind, did not realize it all at once. She had spent so long guarding the quiet, walking dreams, weaving paths. But one morning, as sunlight filtered through the ferns and a warm breeze kissed her mane, she stopped beside the stream and felt something different. Not an arrival. Not a calling, but a resting. A sense that she was no longer between two worlds. She was in both at once. And so, she stood. Tall. Still. And listened to the sound of the stream, not as a sign or a message, but simply as itself. Pure. Present. And she smiled. Because the unicorns had succeeded in what few creatures ever do. They had become ordinary again. Not smaller. Deeper. Not hidden. Alive. The keepers around the world began noticing it too. The shift. The soft unfolding. For some, it came as a gentle surprise, like waking from a dream into a world even more magical than the one they had just left. For others, it came like returning to a long-forgotten room in their own home. A space that had always been there. Waiting. Ready. Some began keeping small glades, not in forests, but in cafes, in stairwells, in notebooks, in waiting rooms. Wherever they paused and invited silence to breathe. Wherever they dared to treat the moment as sacred. That was enough. That was the glade. That was the work. A girl named Mike built her glade in a hospital corridor. She was 12. Her brother was sick, and she had spent weeks sitting on the floor, waiting. One day, she closed her eyes and imagined moss growing under the tiles. She imagined a unicorn sitting beside her. She imagined herself breathing in rhythm with the world. She didn't know what a keeper was. But she became one that day. And everyone who walked down that corridor felt it. A little more space in their chest. A little more air in the moment. They never knew why. But Mai knew. And the unicorns, somewhere beyond the walls, bowed. In the valley, the library beneath the leaves sang differently now. Its song had grown warmer, more grounded. No longer a hidden archive of rare wonders. Now a living chorus of everyday presence. It still pulsed with old stories. But now, it pulsed also with a stranger helping a child tie their shoes. A baker rising before the sun to knead bread with love. A woman humming to her plants each morning with one hand on her heart. A boy whispering, "I forgive you," to a father who would never hear it. These were the stories now. These were the glades. Not perfect moments. True ones. The kind that leave the air warmer. The kind that unicorns gather around, invisible but near. Sorrel no longer waited at the forest's edge. She walked freely, not to guide, but to greet. She would appear beside rivers. In alleyways lit by neon signs. In the corner of classrooms, her breath barely a shimmer. Not to impress. Not to prove. Only to witness. Only to be part. Her presence was never loud. But it was unmistakable to those who carried the story inside them. Those who still listened. Still hoped. Still remembered. The unicorns had done something rare in this world. They had transformed not by conquest, but by surrender. They had let go of hiding. Let go of the illusion that they must stay rare to stay real. They had allowed themselves to become part of the world again. Not as myth. As mirror. And now, when someone knelt beside a dying animal and held its paw gently. When someone forgave themselves in the silence of their kitchen. When someone looked at a tree and truly saw it. The unicorns came. Softly. Without fanfare. Without magic tricks. Only presence. Only realness. Only love. You may have felt them lately. Not as visions or symbols or stories. But as moments that slowed you down and made you cry for no reason. As a weight behind your heart that felt like beauty and sorrow braided together. As the feeling that someone, somewhere, understood you, completely, and was walking beside you even when you couldn't see them. That's them. That's the glade. That's the library remembering you in real time. And yes, it remembers everything. Not to judge. To hold. To honor. To offer it back to you when you are ready. Not as pain. but as wisdom. Not as punishment, but as a path. There is one more truth now. And it is this. You are the story now. Not the one reading it. Not the one dreaming it. The one living it. Every breath. Every kindness. Every pause. You are the glade. You are the library. You are the unicorn. Not because you are perfect, but because you are present. Because you choose to care even when no one sees. Because you listen. Because you remember. And because the world needs your softness more than ever. Even in daylight. Especially in daylight. So, beloved dreamer, sleep now. Not because the journey is over, but because you are home. And tomorrow, when you wake, the glade will wake with you. You will walk through your day not as someone chasing magic, but as someone carrying it, breathing it, weaving it. Into smiles. Into silence. Into every step. And the unicorns? They will be walking too. Right beside you. Hooves on pavement. Breath in wind. Horn light in your shadow. Always with you. Especially when you forget. Especially when you fall. Because love, real love, never vanishes. It only waits. And now. It walks.